of the scope and types of concerns, because it's premature to give you information about conditions, but we'll be as fulsome as we can in that information.
Sorry, Dr Russell, I'm asking for all information. So this is Senate estimates and I'm seeking that information.
Senator, I'm saying that we don't have information at this stages of our inquiries about conditions that may or may not be imposed at the conclusion of our inquiries.
I understand that, but if you could provide all relevant correspondence, any briefings, any other advice in relation to that matter, I would be grateful.
Yes.
And I'm talking about all relevant correspondence, please. Thanks very much, Dr Russell. Thanks, Chair.
Good, thanks very much for that. And just, Dr Russell, if there's any matters, because there was quite a bit in there, I was trying to keep track as well myself, and the questions that the Senator has a right to ask, of course. But if there's opportunities that you didn't feel that you had an opportunity to answer some of those questions, and you are welcome to take on notice any matters that you wish to respond to as well. But I shall leave that to your consideration.
Senator, given the nature of the questions, I'd very much like to respond on notice with summary of activity that we've undertaken at a sector level, and at a high level provide an indication of the ongoing casework and the nature and types of concerns and follow-up.
Thank you, Dr Russell. Now, excuse you for the rest of the evening, and thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. We now go to the Australian Research Council. Good, thanks, Mr. Professor Shergold. Would you like to make an opening statement?
A very important opening statement, Senator. I last appeared, I think, before Senate estimates as the Secretary of the Department of Education 23 years ago, so it's very exciting to return.
Thank you. I think today you are the most excited person to actually be here. I hope the excitement stays with you until the end. But thank you. Thank you for that. Now, Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, Chair. And I have to start by saying that it is absolutely shameful that the ARC has caved to racist pressure from the Murdoch media, from the Liberals, and interference from the Education Minister to target and now suspend Dr. Randa Abdul Fattah's ARC scholarship. Did Minister Clare provide any evidence with his request to investigate Dr. Abdul Fattah? And if so, what was the evidence?
So, Senator, we had started to look at this before the Minister wrote to me. In fact, we had started work the day before, and then the Minister wrote to me asking if we would look at this case. This is not an issue about freedom of speech. This is about an issue which is fundamental to Senate estimates. It's about the acquittal of public funds. It's about someone who gets a grant, and with that grant, there are conditions attached. The responsibility is taken on by the university within which that researcher works. So it is clear, I think, that if a story appears in a newspaper where a grant recipient is alleged to have said, and I emphasise alleged, I look for ways to bend the rules, to subvert them. Part of my funding, ARC grant funding, is to hold a traditional academic conference. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. What sort of public servant would it be who would ignore that?
A public servant who actually looks at evidence.
And that's the correct thing, Senator. So the key thing at that stage to do is not to accept what's in the newspaper.
But start an investigation anyway.
The key is to start an investigation with Macquarie University, who had the responsibility for managing that grant, to ask them, is that correct or not? Quite simply, is the grant, very significant grant, being used for the purposes that were intended? And that was the inquiry that was begun. Those were the discussions that we've had with Macquarie University. I believe that they had already decided by, I think, February the 3rd, their own view that at the university level they should suspend. We had detailed discussions on the 4th and 5th of February. It was clear, working with the university, that they required significantly greater time to look at the issues and whether they had managed this grant appropriately. And on that basis, we did not terminate or cancel the grant, we suspended it, because it is important that natural justice and due process work through. That grant is suspended until Macquarie University is able to come back and give us clear evidence that they have managed this grant appropriately. I should emphasise to you, this is not unusual. This is very visible because it's been on the paper, but the ARC every year investigates 10 or a dozen, sometimes more, grants to make sure that they are being administered appropriately, managed appropriately by the university that is responsible.
Do you investigate those grants based on allegations raised in an article in The Australian, a publication which is known to be racist and has been targeting and harassing Dr. Randa Abdul Fattah since April 2024? Are all your investigations based on evidence or selected bits of a speech that was delivered in a rag which is called The Australian?
They are all based upon, our inquiries are based when allegations are raised and when, for a variety of reasons, we have concerns that the university is not administering the grant appropriately or managing it appropriately.
So at 4:15 on 30th January, The Australian published what it described as an expose of Dr. Abdul Fattah's speech at the QUT's National Symposium on Unifying Anti-Racist Research and Action, which was hosted by QUT's Indigenous and Research Centre, Karamba Institute. At 8:04 p.m. on 31st January, The Australian reported that Federal Education Minister Jason Clare had written to the ARC, requesting the ARC board investigate this issue as a matter of priority. What time did the ARC receive Minister Clare's written communication?
I think it was on the day after. I think it was on the 31st of January. We had already started to look at this quite quickly on the 30th of January and had been in touch with the university about what they knew. Okay. We needed to find out initially, was this a proper report? Were these allegations of what had been said true? Did it actually relate to the grant? There are a whole series of issues that now need to be addressed, and it is not for us to address them directly with the researcher. As you know, that's not how the ARC works. It is through the university that has taken on the responsibility of managing the grant.
So you, as soon as you saw the article, you contacted the university?
Senator, we've been in contact with the university since last year on this matter.
I'm talking about this particular
I'm going to answer your
article
question.
and the start
Senator,
of the
I'm answering your
investigation.
question. Can I please, Chair, answer the question? We've been engaging with Macquarie University for a year on this matter. I've been in personal contact with the DVCR numerous times. On the 30th, he contacted me. He reached out to have a meeting. We had that on the 30th. And at that meeting, we agreed to a set of steps that we needed to take to get to the bottom of this. This was completely before and independent of any ministerial letter to the chair.
So was the meeting initiated after the article in The Australian?
Yes, it was. Yes, because prima facie, it was concerning to them. Prima facie, it was concerning to us. We didn't prejudge anything, and we still haven't.
Well, you've suspended the grant.
Pending the investigation.
And on the 3rd of February, when Macquarie University reached out to us to say that they had initiated a review during which all non-salary expenditure on the grant will be suspended. We were even more concerned. So the decisions that we then sort of took subsequently were based on a significant concern, prima facie. And as I say, we've not prejudged it, but as Professor Shergold has outlined, we need to give direction to Macquarie University so that they can make the appropriate inquiries.
So,
and sorry, Senator, it's very important that their engagement with the researcher affords the researcher natural justice, and that's something that we're committed to as well.
So you talked to the Australian, you gave comments, or the ARC gave comments to the Australian about having significant concerns about the recent comments made by the researcher. Did you actually deign to try and find out whether those were the comments made by the researchers?
Indeed.
What was the context? Did you contact the researcher? Or how did you, did you get hold of all of the speech there?
It would not be appropriate for us to contact the researcher. Okay. That would not be appropriate.
So how did you find out what the whole speech was about?
Our arrangement is with Macquarie University.
Okay.
So there were two direct channels that I pursued. Firstly, with Macquarie University themselves. Did they have the evidence to which was purported by the report? Secondly, I wrote to the Vice-Chancellor of QUT and sought, if they had it and if they thought it appropriate, either a video or a transcript of the purported comments. So we have tried, but Macquarie now need to investigate it, and it will be part of their efforts, including to give natural justice to everyone involved.
So, sorry, did you get those comments from QUT or from Macquarie University, all of the comments, or did you just rely on the Australians' selected bit of videos to give comment to them saying how significantly concerned you were? Is that natural justice?
We have not prejudged it. I have sought personally to get a copy of the evidence. Neither Macquarie was in a position at that point to be able to furnish it to us, and because of QUT entering into their own review and inquiries, they said it would be inappropriate for them to furnish it to us. Now, the matter for us is that we will ask and require Macquarie University to explore that and seek the evidence as part of their dealings with their researcher.
Why did you give comments to the Australian when you have none of that information? Why did you say that the ARC was significantly concerned about recent comments and regarding the conduct of research? Why did you say that? That is not due process. That is not procedural fairness.
Well, it is actually, because we said we had significant concerns about the reported comments. We did not purport to form a view with it.
Why?
We made it very clear to the Australian and other news outlets that all of our grants and arrangements are with universities as administering organisations, and that our concern was how the administering organisation was or wasn't appropriately managing the grant.
How is it appropriate to respond, to indulge, to legitimise an article in the Australian and then launching an investigation based on an article?
Senator, I have to say, I've got to tell you, I am bewildered. I'm genuinely bewildered. If your job as a public servant is to, on behalf of government, administer, at least indirectly in this case, public monies, and a significant allegation is made, I cannot imagine
by a racist organisation that has been after this researcher for months and months.
I cannot imagine.
Shameful, Professor Shergold.
So Professor Shergold, can you? Sorry, no, I don't. If we can allow Professor Shergold to answer the question and show a decent amount of respect for people answering questions and asking questions, I know Senator Faruqi will have further questions she'll want to ask. Professor Shergold.
Simply, if it's brought to my attention a significant allegation that money is being misused, the first thing I will do is to have an investigation. In this case, it is through Macquarie University who have that. I haven't prejudged this case. What I do know, as in many other instances during every year, is we talk to universities about whether grants are being spent for the purposes that were intended under the conditions that were set and are being managed by the university. It is not unusual.
What are the terms of reference of this investigation?
Senator, so I wrote to Macquarie University on the 12th of February, issuing a notice of suspension. And in that letter, which is in confidence, but I'm okay to sort of give evidence that there are 4 areas that we seek assurances and evidence and information from Macquarie about how they are administering the grant. They go to the administration and the use of the funds. We did direct them to engage an independent audit capability to do that. They go to questions of research integrity. They go to potential conflicts of interest and the management thereof by the university. And they go to potential variations of the grant undertaken potentially without notice to the ARC, and any other matter that may arise that's relevant.
Are you able to table the terms of reference for the committee?
It's not a term of reference, it's a direction
Are you able to
regarding,
table that for the committee?
I can take that on notice, Senator.
Thank you. Has the ARC received any communications about the investigation into Dr. Abdul Fattah's future fellowship from the Australian Academic Alliance Against Anti-Semitism, also known as 5A?
We have had a number of letters. There was an open letter, I think, in Overland, and there has since been a letter which is continuing to gather signatories, I think, because it's open. It's a letter really predominantly dealing with issues of freedom of speech.
I know about those. I'm asking about a specific organisation. Have you received any communications?
I'm not aware of
No, I don't
one,
believe.
but
I would have to check. It's not one of the ones that I remember receiving.
Okay.
No.
Has the ARC received any communications about Dr. Abdul Fattah and her future fellowship from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry?
I'm not aware of
No,
any correspondence.
not to my knowledge.
The Jewish Board of Deputies?
Not to my knowledge.
The Australia-Israel Jewish Affairs Council?
Not to
Not
my
aware
knowledge.
of
I will check, but I haven't. Certainly haven't read them. Yep,
if you could check
willingly.
and find out. You were referring earlier, Professor Shergold, to an open letter signed by 750 Australian academics concerned about the independence of the ARC and academic freedom, which was published in the Overland on 10th January. Have you seen that open letter, and what is the ARC's view and arguments put forward by the signatories?
I have seen the letter, and we will respond appropriately. My first assessment of the letter is it's well argued, but it's about freedom of speech. And I'm not investigating freedom of speech. I'm investigating the use of a government grant.
It goes to the concerns about the independence of the ARC very deeply, that letter. Have you responded to them yet or not?
No, I have not responded to that letter at this stage.
The NTEU has also written to you, Professor Shergold, seeking assurances that this whole process has not been influenced by external forces, including media corporations. Well, you made it pretty clear that it was exactly influenced by the Australian, but have you responded to the NTEU and provided them with a response?
I wouldn't articulate what I have said to you, Senator, in those terms.
You wouldn't, but that's what I clearly heard.
I would say that if a serious allegation is made publicly about a grant being misused as a public servant in any such instance, I would have an investigation.
How long is this investigation going to go on for?
It will depend upon Macquarie.
So there is no end time to this investigation?
Senator, the part of the... Because it's a complicated direction that we've given to Macquarie University, of course we've afforded them, under due process, a right to take counsel and advise how long they think it's likely to take. So we're still working through with Macquarie University the timeline. I would, though, just say that we don't accept your characterisation of the way the investigation has been initiated, and both the Chair and I have given very clear evidence about the principles through which this has been taking place.
You haven't seen the evidence, you just told me that.
I beg your pardon, Senator, I gave
gave
clear evidence that I sought it, had have been informed that it was not going to be furnished to ARC because of legal considerations, but I also gave clear evidence that we would expect Macquarie University, under the direction of our letter of suspension, that they will seek the evidence and afford everyone natural justice to respond to it. So that was clearly our evidence. So I would dispute your characterisation, absolutely.
You can dispute till the cows come home, Dr. Johnson, but that's exactly what you said. Chair, I have a few questions on another line of questioning, but I'm happy to pass around the call for a little bit, or I can just finish off with a few more questions.
Senator Henderson has some brief questions.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to you. Professor Shergold, just for my own understanding, so you started as chair of the ARC last June?
July, I think.
Last July, but didn't appear in November estimates?
That is correct.
And are we going to have the pleasure of your company on an ongoing basis?
I suspect I've set the precedent, and the answer is yes.
Right. Okay. Terrific. Look, that's important. I raise the timing of your appointment because, in fact, in June of last year, in estimates, I had extensive discussions with Dr. Johnson in relation to the ARC's investigation of this matter. I'm going to table a letter I wrote to the Minister for Education, Mr. Clare, on the 29th of April, where I raised a range of what I regard as serious concerns about Dr. Randa Abdel Fattah's conduct. Are you across those earlier concerns that I raised?
I have seen some of the correspondence, yes.
So not only did I raise concerns about the indoctrination of children, the way that she encouraged children to chant terrorist slogans at the University of Sydney encampment protest. She's also made some shocking comments in relation to Israel. She was involved in the doxing of Jewish Australians, and she published an image on Facebook of a man parachuting with a parachute in the colours of the Palestinian flag, reminiscent of the motorised paragliders used by Hamas terrorists to breach the border and murder, of course, hundreds of innocent Israelis. So it very much appeared that she was endorsing the actions of Hamas. I am deeply concerned in my letter back in April, Professor. I asked the Minister to investigate whether any grant funding should be recovered as a result of any non-compliance with grant conditions. So it was there were many red flags that were raised back then about whether Dr. Abdel Fattah was complying with her grant. We then went to June with Dr. Johnson saying that an investigation was underway. He gave evidence about how complex that was and about all of the discussions that were happening with Macquarie back in June. And then in November, when I again raised this question, I got very little clarity from the ARC about the status of this investigation. So, Professor, I'm going to ask you, in terms of the investigation to date by the ARC that started at least in June of last year, did you find any breaches of grant conditions by this person?
I can only tell you, looking back at the records, because it was before my time. It is important to distinguish, of course, there are two separate issues that are in your letter. One relates to Macquarie University and their view about her conduct as an academic who they employ. That is not my issue. My issue is concern about the use or misuse of the grant she's received. I do know that... But
Professor, whether she complies with the terms and conditions of her employment agreement is relevant to the ARC's investigation, and certainly that was the evidence that Dr. Johnson has previously given. So can I ask for clarity? Has there been breaches of Dr. Randa Abdel Fattah's terms and conditions insofar as her employment at Macquarie is concerned?
I genuinely cannot answer that because Macquarie University have not told me. I understand that there are inquiries going on, but I am not privy to the decisions. Are you?
And I don't think I said quite what you said, Senator Henderson, but one thing I can say is that we had not to our own satisfaction, on the basis of the inquiries we were making with Macquarie University last year, formed a view that they had told us clearly whether some of the activities that the academic had purportedly engaged in were or were not linked to the actual grant. And I think I said very clearly to you that our concern is nexus to the research grant, not employment.
Well, I would beg to differ, and I'm looking at the transcript from June.
I think I did say that
And
it was part of the complexity that Macquarie University was...
That's right, you talked about the complexity.
...of looking into.
That's
yes.
right, and when you referenced the complexity, you referenced a range of matters, including research integrity matters,
yes,
including the academic's conduct and the scope of the research work.
yes.
And also, you also cited that what was relevant were matters concerning her employment.
I cited that as a particular challenge for the university. I did say very clearly that our question was nexus to the research grant, and we'd not, and still have not established sufficiently to our satisfaction whether the university had managed appropriately the sort of distinct comportments in which an individual may or may not be conducting themselves. The research integrity matter, as I just gave evidence to Senator Faruqi, the question about conduct and its relationship to the research grant have all been part of the notice of suspension that I wrote to the DVCR about and directed them to furnish evidence to us so that we could satisfy ourselves on all of the questions that you've just raised.
Well, I raised them 10 months ago.
You did?
And you have, I'm looking at the transcript from June of last year, you said that the DVCR has said in correspondence that they are considering whether the research is compliant with both the Code of Conduct and ARC funding requirements as expeditiously as possible, but of course they have to follow their own procedures and policies. And it is a complex area because it does also invite such things as questions of employment law and individual universities' codes of practice and conduct. And generally in an employment contract, employees are required to comply with their employer's code of practice. So what is the outcome of your investigation in relation to whether this person has complied with the ARC funding grant? Because you have started this work last June, Dr. Johnson. Now, I know Professor Shergold wasn't there then, but I would say to you, and I raised serious concerns, and I would put to you that you whitewashed those concerns. You didn't take them seriously. They were serious concerns, and it was very evident. And it's only now because Dr. Randa Abdel Fattah has made an admission in a speech that she bent the rules that the Minister has finally acted. But it was very clear on the substance of this matter that there were serious issues to address, and we got back from you at the time crickets.
I would dispute that, Senator, and we, from ARC's point of view, independently of the Minister's request that we investigate it, we had not formed a final view about whether Macquarie University had been appropriately managing the grant. I certainly hadn't, and I was in correspondence with Macquarie University, still asking them to clarify. Now, the distinction I'll draw between, Senator, that is the case, and I don't accept your characterisation.
Oh, I'm not saying anything.
I know, but facial expressions
I'm just
count.
I'm just saying that it looks very much like that the ARC didn't take this seriously enough, and if you are still waiting for questions from Macquarie, given this has been on foot since last June at least, that is not good enough. So I'm going to ask you again, have you found any breaches of the grant conditions?
What we've found are...
Sorry, Dr. Johnson, by all means, could you answer that question for Senator Henderson as you're about to? There's also a question you were also answering before, so if you want to conflate both of them, you are welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Senator, we prima facie have not been satisfied that the questions that we've been asking have been sufficiently answered for us to draw a conclusion. By issuing a notice of suspension, which included a direction, we've been able to give clear directions to Macquarie University on not just assurances provided to us, but to furnish evidence. I sent 2 senior executive officers for a site visit, and on the basis of that, and on the basis of Macquarie's own decision to review and suspend the grant, we took this action. At no point between your questioning of us last year and today have we not taken this matter seriously. It is a significant matter of public confidence in the use of public resources, but we are also committed to furnishing natural justice and due process. Now, it may be inconvenient for you, but these do take time. We need to see that all of the steps are followed appropriately.
It's not a matter of my inconvenience.
So,
Macquarie...
Dr. Johnson's answering the question, and Senator Anderson, I'll certainly go back to you.
And so we have carried through a number of last year's questions into the direction that we've given Macquarie University, plus the new evidence. And I very clearly said to you multiple times last year that we will go where the facts take us on this. I said that twice in separate evidence.
So Macquarie subsequently advised that there was no case to answer, which it didn't do particularly publicly because it's not before this committee. I understand that. So again, I'm going to ask you the same question. Have you found any breaches of the grant? Has there also been any breaches of the Australian Code for the Responsible Conduct of Research? And are there any other breaches in relation to other matters insofar as your agreement with Macquarie University is concerned?
So we haven't reached a formal finding on any of those. We need to let the course of the investigation play out. But our prima facie view was that there was significant risks that may not have been managed appropriately, and therefore we suspended the grant. That furnishes Macquarie University with appropriate time to follow process, and we will follow where the facts take us. That's where we'll go, but we will make sure that we afford everyone in this situation fairness and due process.
Thank you very much. So you've not made... Have you made any... You've told me...
Senator Henderson, just didn't want to interrupt your question, but I'll need to go back. I am sorry, but I'll need to go back shortly to... Sure, okay.
So you've indicated you've not...
Formally found at this point. That would be premature, and it would be in front of the process that we've established with Macquarie. So we would not be finding something where we've asked them to investigate significant lines of investigation. We would not be reaching a finding in starting that process. That would be completely inappropriate.
Sorry, Dr. Johnson. Have you made any informal findings, any preliminary findings in relation to any breaches at all?
No, we have not.
And so how long will this investigation take, and have you got all the information you need from Macquarie University now?
No, we haven't, because that's part of the direction was for them to provide us with preliminary advice on how long each of these lines of investigation will take them, including commissioning independent audits. And it's very important to afford them that, because they are the people we contract with. It's with Macquarie University. We're still working through the timeline with them, but these processes do take time.
So, Dr. Johnson, do you have copies of the correspondence between the ARC and Macquarie?
I've already sort of taken that on notice.
You haven't got anything with you here right now?
I do not, no.
You've got nothing? Nothing in your folders or no?
Do you mean the letter that I wrote to Macquarie University? Do I have it?
That's right.
No, I do not have it.
All right, if we could have a copy of that on notice.
We'll take that on notice.
Professor, I am very heartened to hear about your concern about taxpayers, precious taxpayer dollars, because that's been at the heart of my concern as well, that this is a lot of money. Research dollars are precious in this country and they need to be properly safeguarded. You have heard my concerns about the duration of this investigation, and I think the evidence suggests that it was only because of the admissions made by this academic that the investigation was reignited. Is there any reason why you didn't seek to suspend the grant earlier?
Well, from my position, I think the suspension of the grant took place very quickly after the allegations were made and after a series of discussions with Macquarie University. It took place within about 2 weeks, the decision to suspend, until we could get a full account of what had happened and whether the grant was being used appropriately.
And that was after the admissions were made that the rules were being bent in relation to the grant?
After the allegations were raised that the researcher had said she'd bent the rules, yes.
Sure, okay. All right, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Senator Faruqi.
Thanks, Chair. Dr. Johnson, the ARC planned for the outcomes of the 2025 discovery projects to be announced as late as 29th November last year. They were announced only 3 days before that. But the ARC opened applications for the next round a month before, with a deadline of 13th December. And that barely gave 2 weeks after the 2025 outcomes were announced for researchers. And this overlap between rounds meant that 1,132 teams of researchers were having to prepare applications for the 2026 round because they didn't know the outcome of the 2025 round. Like, why did the ARC plan this overlap between rounds?
Thanks, Senator, for that question. I think we provided sort of evidence along this line to you last year as well. As you'll be aware that when the amended Act was introduced and commenced on 1 July last year, it had a range of quite complicated changes to the way grant guidelines were authorised. For the first time, it introduced a parliamentary process. And so what we had to do was remake the grant guidelines for all of the grants going forward, and that meant there was a parliamentary process, including a disallowance. So that was not a trivial exercise to implement that change, and what it meant was there would need to be, of necessity, a truncation of some of the sort of timeframes between ending and commencing. Now, we did communicate that very clearly to the sector, and we explained very clearly that, look, this is just it's arisen as a fact of we're now required to follow this process because the Parliament itself has passed this legislation. So it was really just a function of that change.
But obviously you control the schedule. You could have changed that to have less of an overlap. It is in your control. And why I'm asking this is because having thousands of researchers preparing applications for grants, half of which might have already won them, is obviously a huge waste. And you've spoken tonight a lot about public resources. Have you actually calculated how much time and ultimately how much taxpayers' money this overlap between rounds costs?
I'm not aware that we've done any calculation or modelling on that. We were clearly cognizant that this would be a one-off situation, and we did explain ourselves, and we went for the sort of the best case solution because from memory, working through the way the calendar would work under this new process, and Senator, you need to remember that there was a potential that the Parliament could disallow any of those guidelines, so there was a risk there as well. So we were managing a number of risks, and we put forward a calendar and explained the reasoning for it, and it was a one-off related to that change process. It's not unusual when you undergo complicated changes for those sort of things to happen, but we had anticipated it and we had communicated it, and it's unfortunate, but it was unavoidable in that instance.
Well, I don't agree with that, but my back of the envelope calculations show that it could have been a $4.6 million worth of money that was wasted. So obviously, what you choose to agree to waste and what you say is taxpayers' money's wasted, is a choice that you make. In some instances, you can waste that money, and in others, you say it shouldn't be wasted. Universities have their own internal deadlines for researchers to meet when preparing ARC applications as well. And often these are at least a month before your deadline, I think. much longer than the 2 weeks you left them. So I guess you said you told the universities that this was coming, but did you consult the universities about this overlap and try to figure out better ways of dealing with it?
Senator, we communicated with the sector about this. I think we made it very clear that it was an unavoidable consequence of a rather significant change to the way our grants operate. I'm not sure that all universities have the same processes in terms of their own deadlines. That's very much a matter for each individual deadline. But I do take your point that there were sort of disruptions, and that's not unusual. It's an unfortunate consequence, but it's not always an unusual one when you do implement significant legislative change.
So you did communicate but not consult with universities?
I'll take that on notice. I can't remember whether we consulted.
I guess I'm really concerned because researchers ask me, and they also ask publicly. I've seen a lot of activity on social media about whether the ARC actually values their time. And so what do you say to them? Because it is a waste of their time, very valuable research time, and a lot of money as well. So what do you have to say to them?
I guess what I would say to them, and perhaps Professor Shergold would like to add something here, is that I'd invite them to look at the discussion paper that was released by the ARC on Tuesday about the reform proposal for the future NCGP. And right at the heart of that is something that we very clearly heard during the consultations, which was that the removal of burden and red tape was very important. And the design which the board has come up with, a streamlined NCGP for the future, as well as reducing administrative burden, goes directly to the heart of your question and that concern. And it's something that we, for a significant period of time in the ARC, have taken very seriously, and we have been taking steps to reduce burden.
I know, we've been chatting about that for years. And
yes.
Yeah. But this is something that really needs to be considered. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. And let me just say, though, on that discussion paper, which was launched, and the initial reception has been very positive. I think the proposals that are now out for a second round of consultation about streamlining the process and reducing as much as possible some of the administrative red tape, so long as it doesn't undermine, obviously, public accountability, I believe we can deliver, and all of the feedback I have received so far has been very positive in that regard.
Good, thanks very much. I know Senator O'Sullivan has a very brief to take us through to, I'm not looking at the clock, it has to say 10.
We're right up against it, so I'll ask my questions quickly, and if you can give me quick responses. How often has the ARC met directly with or briefed the Minister in the last 12 months?
Met with who? With the Minister. I obviously had a meeting when I was first appointed, and I have had meetings with the Minister's office throughout this, including obviously through the process of selecting the new CEO and developing the new discussion paper.
Has the Minister given any direction, either directly or indirectly, around the quality or type of research that should be funded?
He has not given me any informal advice in that regard. Obviously, it is open, as you know, to the government, successive governments, to set what are the national priorities they want. And indeed, in the discussion paper we've got, we are suggesting that that should continue. In fact, one of the programs we've got is called Prioritise, which is so that the government can set directions to which researchers can respond.
And I've been in estimates all week, so I haven't had a chance to read your paper that you published earlier in the week, but I look forward to getting across that. Was there any input into that from the Minister at all? The direction that you've...
No, nothing came from the Minister directly in terms of, but obviously I've kept the Minister informed about the processes that are being used and the nature of the paper and what is being proposed.
And what's the ARC, it's probably a big question for the time we got, but what's the ARC doing to lift the standard and commercialisation of research of funds?
It's a great question. I mean, as you know, the IRC is at one level such a small part of the research and development ecosystem. We're, 7% of the funding. It's a very important 7%. It's the important 7%, particularly in terms of early career researchers and developing people who will continue to research through their lives, whether at universities or indeed in business and industry and so on. I am watching very closely, as you can imagine, the development of the larger discussion paper on research and development and look at where we, the ARC, will fit into that. But I'm very clear in my mind at the moment that we have a particular focus on that 7% on the research that's done through university. I want to do as much as possible in that area to encourage even greater collaboration, not just between universities and disciplines, but with the end users of researcher, business, but also community organisations.
Well, I look forward to reading the paper. I've read the AFR reporting on what was there, and I particularly like the fact that you've said that research needs to be more focused in this country.
Well, and I think the other thing that was picked up in that AFR article, which I think is important, is we've said that for the grants that we make, I think we've got to be, in some instances, more courageous. One of the challenges with research is obviously it often fits and extends existing paradigms. In a sense, it's not just encouraging early career researchers, but encouraging researchers wherever they are in their career to look at new evidence, interpret new evidence, be willing to be a bit bolder. And I think our particular role is to be able to support some of that more innovative and creative thinking.
I'm going to ask one more question. It might be the last question of this Parliament, possibly, but are we in a national emergency in terms of research and development?
The discussion paper that's come out is suggesting we've got a challenge. We've all known about the challenge. The challenge is, of course, over the last 10 or 15 years, as a percentage of GDP, both government and private business investment in research has been declining. We have a particular challenge in Australia because although, in fact, we do a pretty good job of public funding of research, it is very difficult to attract the private funding of research that is available in North America or Europe. So I think that paper that has come out looking at that whole research and development is really important. Against that, I didn't think we could wait to bring out the discussion paper on the NCGP, a year down the track. I was pretty confident that whatever happens over the whole of that investment in research, we have a particular and distinctive position.
Thank you.
Good, thanks, Deputy Chair, and thank you very much, Dr. Shergold and the team, and have a very good evening.
Thank you.
That concludes today's hearing. Thank you to all witnesses who appeared and to Hansard and Broadcasting. Wonderful job as always. The Secretariat, they write this down, but they never give themselves self-congratulations, but they deserve it. I remind Senators that written questions on notice should be received from Senators by close of business on Tuesday the 4th of March 2025. Answers to questions on notice will be required to be returned by close of business on Monday the 24th of March 2025. The committee stands adjourned.